The Galactic Council had seen many strange things in its 12,000 years of recorded history. They'd witnessed species that communicated through controlled flatulence, civilizations that worshipped sentient mold, and that one memorable incident with the Glorbian ambassador and the decorative fountain that nobody talked about anymore. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, had prepared them for the sheer audacity of humanity's approach to problem-solving. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. It started, as most disasters do, with a distress call. Commander Zixthor of the Etherian Star Fleet was having what he considered a perfectly reasonable day. He'd had his morning protein cube, filed 17 reports about absolutely nothing, and was looking forward to an afternoon of staring at the vast emptiness of space while contemplating his insignificance in the universe. Standard Tuesday stuff. Then the call came in. "This is Research Station Omega-7. A voice crackled through the comms, laced with what could only be described as panicked chittering. "We have a Code Violet situation. Repeat, Code Violet. We need immediate assistance." Code Violet. Zixthor's 3 hearts sank simultaneously, which was both biologically impressive and emotionally exhausting. Code Violet meant endangered sentient juveniles. It was the one code that superseded all others, the one situation where every species in the known galaxy agreed. You drop everything and you help. The Etherian commander immediately redirected his ship to the research station's coordinates, which happened to be in the contested regions, a charming little corner of space where territorial disputes went to have nervous breakdowns. The station was a joint research facility, one of those diplomatic nightmare projects where 12 different species tried to cooperate on xenobiology studies while simultaneously trying not to murder each other over proper bathroom etiquette. "What's the situation?" Zixthor demanded as his ship docked with the station 20 minutes later. Dr. Venix, a Korthian researcher whose scales were currently flashing a distressed purple, met him at the airlock. The Korthian was wringing all 4 of his hands in a way that would have been comical if the situation weren't so dire. "It's the Mora cubs," Venix said, his voice breaking. "The breeding pair we were studying, they're dead. Some kind of rapid illness. It happened so fast we didn't. And now there are 4 cubs, and they won't eat, and they're going to die, and we've tried everything." Zixthor followed the doctor through the sterile corridors of the station, past labs filled with quietly panicking scientists from a dozen different worlds. The Mora were a protected species, one of the few naturally occurring apex predators that had achieved sentience without developing technology. They were magnificent creatures, standing nearly 3 meters tall when fully grown, with midnight black fur and 6 powerful limbs that could tear through reinforced steel. They were also critically endangered, with fewer than 300 individuals left in the wild. 4 orphaned cubs represented a significant percentage of their species' future. The nursery was a controlled environment designed to replicate the Mora homeworld's climate. Humid, warm, with a faint scent of sulfur that made most oxygen breathers want to immediately shower. Inside a large enclosure, 4 small bundles of black fluff huddled together in a corner, mewing pitifully. "They haven't eaten in 32 hours, Venix explained, gesturing to the various bowls of food scattered around the enclosure. "We've tried the standard formula for their age group. We've tried live prey. We've tried pre-killed prey. We've tried every variation of temperature, texture, and presentation that our xenobiology database recommends. They just won't eat." "Have you tried forced feeding?" Zixthor asked, though he already knew the answer. We tried. They have a rejection reflex. They spit it back up immediately. Commander, in Mora development, cubs this age are entirely dependent on parental feeding. They won't eat on their own for another 6 weeks. If we can't figure out how to feed them in the next 12 hours, they'll be too weak to recover. Zixthor stared at the cubs, feeling the weight of potential extinction pressing down on his carapace. This was exactly the kind of impossible situation that made him question his career choices. Perhaps he should have become an accountant like his parent unit had suggested. Has the council been notified? Yes, sir. They're sending every specialist they can find, but the nearest one won't arrive for another 40 hours. It's the contested regions. You know how transport logistics are. 40 hours. The cubs would be dead in 12. Put out a general distress call, Zixthor ordered. Maximum broadcast range. Someone, somewhere, might know something we don't. The response to their broadcast was overwhelming and utterly useless. They received 17,000 suggestions, ranging from the merely impractical to the genuinely insane. The Glorbian representative suggested singing to the cubs in 4-part harmony. The Zythian scientific community recommended a complicated ritual involving crystals and what their translator unhelpfully labeled as vibrational energy realignment. 3 different religious groups offered prayers to their various deities, which was touching but not particularly helpful when dealing with the immediate problem of starving babies. And then, 16 hours into their desperate vigil, they received a transmission from a ship that was, according to sensors, absolutely tiny and probably held together with hope and what humans called duct tape. "Hey there, distress-calling people," a voice said in remarkably casual galactic common. "This is the independent cargo vessel Wandering Curiosity. We picked up your broadcast about the baby feeding situation. I might be able to help with that." Zixthor looked at Venix. Venix looked at Zixthor. They both looked at the communications officer, a young Prixion who shrugged all 6 of her shoulders. "This is Commander Zixthor of the Etherian Fleet. Identify yourself and state your credentials." "Name's Marcus Chen, captain and sole crew member of this fine vessel. As for credentials, well, I don't have fancy degrees in xenobiology, if that's what you're asking. But I grew up on a colony world with about 40 different species, and I've done animal rescue work for the better part of 15 years. Helped raise everything from Vexarian tunnel hoppers to Kresnik sky whales. So you know, I've fed a lot of babies." "The situation involves Mora cubs," Zixthor said, trying to keep the skepticism out of his voice and failing miserably. "A critically endangered species with highly specialized feeding requirements." "Yeah, I got that from the broadcast. Look, Commander, I'm about 3 hours away from your position. You got nothing to lose by letting me try. Worst case scenario, I fail just like everyone else already has. And you're no worse off than you are right now. Best case scenario, those babies eat and live to grow up into magnificent murder machines. What do you say?" Zixthor wanted to say no. Every protocol, every regulation, every instinct honed by decades of military service screamed at him to politely decline this random human's offer and wait for the proper specialists with their proper credentials and their proper equipment. But then he looked through the observation window at the 4 tiny cubs, who were now barely moving, and he thought about explaining to the Galactic Council how he'd let 4 members of a critically endangered species die because he'd been too busy following proper procedure. "Fine," he said. "You have clearance to dock. But understand this. If you waste our time or distress these cubs further, I will personally ensure you spend the next decade mining asteroids in the punishment sector." "Fair enough." Marcus said cheerfully. See you in 3 hours. Those 3 hours were the longest of Zixthor's life. The cubs were fading visibly now, their pitiful mewing growing weaker with each passing minute. 2 of them had stopped moving entirely, conserving what little energy they had left. The station's veterinary team had them on IV fluids, but that was just buying time, not solving the problem. When Marcus Chen finally arrived, Zixthor wasn't sure what he'd been expecting. Perhaps some grizzled, weathered explorer covered in scars and exuding competence. What he got instead was a human who looked to be in his early 30s standard years, with an easy smile, dark hair pulled back in what humans called a ponytail, and wearing what appeared to be the most aggressively casual clothing Zixthor had ever seen. The human shirt featured a cartoonish image of something called a cat, with text that read, "I do what I want." His pants had actual patches sewn onto them. He carried a single battered duffel bag. This was who the universe had sent to save an endangered species. Fantastic. So, Marcus said, looking through the observation window at the cubs. Okay, yeah, I can work with this. Can I get a full rundown of everything you've tried? For the next 20 minutes, Venix provided an exhaustive list of every single attempt they'd made to feed the cubs. Marcus listened intently, occasionally nodding or making small humming noises. When the doctor finished, the human was quiet for a long moment. All right, Marcus finally said. I think I see the problem. You've been so focused on what to feed them that you forgot about how to feed them. The method is obvious, Venix said, a touch defensively. Oral consumption of appropriate nutrition. Sure, but you're missing the context. These are babies who just lost their parents. They're traumatized, they're scared, and they're in a completely alien environment surrounded by creatures they've never seen before. You've got bright lights, sterile smells, and people prodding at them with instruments. In their mind, this isn't a feeding situation. This is a threat situation. We've attempted to minimize stress, Venix protested. I'm sure you have by your standards. But here's the thing about raising babies of any species. It's not just about meeting physical needs. It's about meeting emotional ones too. These cubs don't need just food. They need to feel safe. They need to feel like someone cares about them, not just as specimens, but as individuals. That's remarkably anthropomorphic thinking, Zixthor said dryly. Marcus grinned. Anthropomorphic, huh? Funny word for it. Let me ask you something, Commander. When you were a juvenile, did you eat better when you felt safe and cared for, or when you were stressed and afraid? Zixthor opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The human had a point, damn him. Can I go in there? Marcus asked. Absolutely not. 3 different scientists said simultaneously. The cubs are under quarantine protocols, Venix explained. We can't risk cross-species contamination. They're dying, Marcus said flatly. In about 4 hours, give or take, those babies are going to be too weak to save. Your quarantine protocols are about to become a moot point. So I'll ask again. Can I go in there? Zixthor looked at the cubs, then at the human, then back at the cubs. He thought about the paperwork. He thought about the regulations. He thought about how his career was probably over anyway if these cubs died on his watch. Sterilization protocols, he ordered. Full decontamination. Get him in there. 30 minutes later, Marcus emerged from the decontamination chamber wearing the station's standard sterile suit, looking like an inflated balloon animal and moving with all the grace of a concussed Glorbian. He'd refused to leave his duffel bag behind, insisting that he needed his equipment and The science team had spent 20 minutes sterilizing every single item in it, while Marcus watched with barely concealed amusement. The human entered the enclosure alone, moving slowly and deliberately. The moment he crossed the threshold, every monitoring device in the room started screaming alerts. The cubs had gone from barely responsive to fully alert, their small heads tracking Marcus's movements with laser focus. "Easy there, little ones," Marcus said softly, his voice pitched low and gentle. He sat down on the floor, making himself smaller, less threatening. "I know you're scared. I know everything seems terrible right now. But I promise you, it's going to be okay." Outside the enclosure, Zixthor watched through the observation window alongside a dozen scientists, all of them holding their breath. The cubs were still huddled together, but they were watching the human with intense curiosity now, their small noses twitching. Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a soft blanket, worn and faded. He spread it on the floor in front of him, moving with slow, careful movements. Then he pulled out a bottle, something designed for feeding. But it was clearly a human design, not anything from the station supplies. "You know what the secret is to feeding babies?" Marcus said, still in that soft voice, though now he was clearly addressing the observation room as much as the cubs. "It's not about the food. It's never really about the food. It's about trust." He squeezed a small amount of formula, something he'd apparently mixed himself from his own supplies, onto his finger. Then he held out his hand, fingers down, palm up, in a gesture of offering as old as time itself. Nothing happened. Marcus waited. The scientists outside began muttering. This was taking too long. The cubs were too weak for this kind of drawn-out approach. They needed to be more aggressive, try something different. Marcus continued to wait, hand extended, patient as stone. And then, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 3 minutes, the largest of the cubs took a tentative step forward. Then another. It approached Marcus's hand with extreme caution, sniffed once, twice, and then, with a movement so quick it was almost impossible to follow, licked the formula off his finger. The cub froze. Marcus froze. Everyone watching froze. Then the cub licked its small chops and made a sound that wasn't a mew of distress, but something else entirely. Something that might have been a chirp of interest. Marcus smiled. "That's right, sweetie. That's good stuff, isn't it? Come here, let me give you some more." What happened over the next hour was something that the scientists of Research Station Omega-7 would discuss in academic papers for the next decade, though they would never quite be able to explain it in terms of pure biology or psychology. Marcus didn't just feed the cubs. He connected with them. He moved the largest cub onto his lap, supporting it with one arm, while he fed it with the other, speaking in low, soothing tones the entire time. He talked about nothing and everything. The weather on his home colony, his favorite foods, a funny thing he'd seen in a spaceport last month. How brave the cub was being, how strong it was, how it was going to grow up to be magnificent. The cub drank. Not much at first, just a few tentative sips. But then more, and then more still, until it was actively feeding, its small body relaxing against Marcus's chest. When that cub had drunk its fill and fallen into a milk-drunk stupor, Marcus carefully set it on the blanket and reached for the next one. "Come on, number 2, he said gently. "Your turn. I know you're hungry too." It took less time to coax the second cub forward. Then the third. By the time he was working with the fourth and smallest cub, the tiny creature walked right up to him and climbed into his lap without hesitation, mewing plaintively. "I know, baby," Marcus murmured, cradling the smallest cub like it was made of glass. I know you miss your mama. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But you're going to be okay. I promise you're going to be okay. Outside the enclosure, Dr. Venix was openly weeping, his scales flashing through colors that indicated profound, emotional overwhelm. Zixthor found that his own eyes were unaccountably damp, which was biologically strange because Etherians didn't actually produce tears. When all 4 cubs had been fed and were sleeping in a pile on Marcus's blanket, the human finally looked up at the observation window. He was smiling, but his own eyes were suspiciously shiny. They'll need to eat every 4 hours for the next week, he called out, his voice still soft so as not to disturb the sleeping cubs. After that, you can start spacing it out. I'll need to work with whoever's going to be their primary caretaker, teach them the technique. It's not hard, but it takes patience and a willingness to, actually treat them like thinking, feeling beings instead of just biological specimens. How did you know that would work? Venix asked through the intercom, his voice thick with emotion. Marcus shrugged, careful not to disturb the cubs. I didn't, not for sure. But here's the thing about babies. Any babies. Doesn't matter if they're human or Mora or whatever. They need more than just physical care. They need emotional connection. They need to feel like they matter to someone, like someone cares about them as individuals. You can have all the perfect nutrition in the galaxy, but if a baby doesn't feel safe enough to eat it, they won't. They can't. The stress literally shuts down their digestive system. But you're an alien to them, another scientist said. A completely unknown species. Why would they trust you? Because I treated them like people, Marcus said simply. I came in here, and I didn't see specimens or data points or representatives of an endangered species. I saw 4 scared babies who needed help, and somehow they picked up on that. Maybe it's pheromones, maybe it's body language, maybe it's something we don't have words for yet. But they knew I was here to help them, not hurt them. Over the next 3 days, Marcus lived in that enclosure. He fed the cubs every 4 hours, slept curled up with them in between feedings, and gradually taught them that the world, while still frightening and strange, contained beings who cared about their well-being. He also taught the station staff, walking them through every detail of the process with infinite patience. It's not about the bottle, he explained to the team of caretakers who would be taking over when he left. The bottle is just a tool. It's about the connection. You have to be present with them, really present. Talk to them. Tell them about your day. Sing to them if you want. Let them know they're not alone. Singing? One Korthian researcher asked skeptically. Sure, why not? Babies of every species I've ever encountered respond to rhythm and tone. Doesn't matter if the words mean anything to them. It's the intention behind it, the emotion. You're communicating that you're there, that you care, that they're safe. On the 4th day, when the cubs were noticeably stronger and had even started playing a bit, Marcus declared his work done. The staff were trained, the cubs were stable, and he had cargo to deliver on the other side of the sector. Zixthor found him in the docking bay, repacking his battered duffel bag. I never properly thanked you, the commander said awkwardly. You saved 4 lives, possibly an entire species' future. Marcus waved a hand dismissively. Ah, anyone could have done it if they'd thought about it the right way. You just got stuck in your heads, overthinking the problem. Sometimes the solution is simpler than you think. Simple, Zixthor repeated. You made it look simple. But I watched the preliminary reports from the xenopsychology team. What you did The connection you formed with those cubs, they say it shouldn't have been possible. Humans and Mora have completely different evolutionary backgrounds, different communication styles, different everything. By all logical analysis, those cubs should have been just as frightened of you as they were of everyone else. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. You want to know the real secret? The thing that I think makes humans maybe a little bit different? Please. We're social persistence predators, Marcus said. That's our evolutionary niche. We survived not because we were the strongest or the fastest or had the biggest teeth, but because we worked together and we never, ever gave up. And somewhere along the way, we developed this weird ability to form social bonds with just about anything. Dogs, cats, horses, birds, whatever. We befriend things that should logically want to eat us or run away from us. We look at creatures that are completely alien to us, and we think, yeah, I could pet that. That seems strategically unwise. Oh, it absolutely is. Do you know how many humans die every year because they tried to pet something that then ate them? It's a whole thing. But here's the flip side. That same impulse, that drive to connect, to empathize, to form bonds across every possible boundary, means that when we encounter something scared and alone, our first instinct isn't to study it or categorize it or follow proper protocol. Our first instinct is to help, to reach out, to say, hey, it's going to be okay, I'm here now. And you believe that's what made the difference with the cubs? I think they felt it, yeah. I think somehow, on some level, they understood that I wasn't there as a scientist or a rescuer or whatever. I was there as someone who genuinely cared whether they lived or died. Not because of their species' significance, but because they were 4 scared babies who deserved a chance at life. Marcus shouldered his bag. Plus, I'm just really good with kids. Human, alien, doesn't matter. Babies are babies. As Zixthor watched the human's small ship undock and disappear into the vastness of space, he reflected on the strangeness of the galaxy. Here was a species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel, that was still considered junior members of the Galactic Council, that had technology held together with adhesive and optimism, and yet they possessed something that all the advanced science and sophisticated technology of the elder species couldn't replicate. Humanity's gift wasn't their intelligence or their technology or their military might. It was their absolutely insane willingness to look at anything, anywhere, no matter how alien or dangerous or different, and think, I wonder if it needs a hug. The report that Zixthor filed with the Galactic Council was 14 pages long and carefully worded to downplay his numerous protocol violations. The report that the xenopsychology team filed was 78 pages long and concluded that further study was required to understand the human capacity for interspecies emotional bonding. The report that Dr. Venix filed was 312 pages long, had 24 co-authors, and ended up winning the prestigious Kelvin Prize for breakthrough xenobiology research. None of the reports captured the essential truth of what had happened, though. Because how do you quantify the moment when a human sat down on the floor of an enclosure and said to 4 dying cubs, "It's going to be okay," and somehow made it true through nothing more than patience, kindness, and an inexplicable belief that caring about things was never a waste of time? 6 months later, Zixthor received a data packet from Research Station Omega-7. It contained a video file. Curious, he opened it. The video showed the Mora cubs, now significantly larger and thriving, playing in an expanded enclosure. They wrestled with each other, climbed on structures, and occasionally stopped to receive affection from their caretakers. who had clearly learned their lessons well. At the bottom of the video was a message. Thought you'd want to see how they're doing. They're going to be ready for release back into the wild in another year. We're naming them after human virtues: hope, courage, kindness, and Marcus. We figured if humans could save them with nothing but patience and empathy, the least we could do was remember that lesson. Thanks for taking the chance. Thanks for letting the human try. Zixthor watched the video 3 times, then filed it carefully in his personal archives. He had a feeling that humanity was going to continue surprising the galaxy in ways both wonderful and terrifying. And honestly, he was starting to look forward to it. After all, any species crazy enough to look at 4 dying alien cubs and think, "I can fix this with kindness," was either going to get everyone killed or save the entire galaxy. Possibly both. And really, when it came to humans, those were pretty much the only 2 options anyway. The end retry.